Thanks for tuning in to the Our Football Network, Our Football YouTube channel, as we talk some Denver Broncos. And that means we get an opportunity to talk to Chris Tomasson from the Denver Gazette. How's it going, Chris?
Hey, everything's great. Just waiting to go head out to the NFL scouting combine next week.
Yeah, a lot going on in the world of the NFL. It never stops. That's what's so fun about it. And we're having this nice conversation here to get as much information as I know I can to prepare myself and our viewers, of course, for the offseason for the Denver Broncos. And don't forget, it's almost time to order the Our Lads Draft Guide. This is last year's guide. The 2025 guide will be available by April 7th. So you order it now, and then we send you the guides in the mail on April 7th. So you'll get them more than enough time in advance of the NFL draft. And you could also check out, of course, our depth charts, which are updated on a daily basis. No better depth charts in the industry. And it's a great time of year, of course, to be educated with depth charts with everything going on, including the combine, free agency, and the NFL draft. So let's get right to it, Chris, for the Denver Broncos. And what would you say would be the biggest headline right now for Denver this offseason?
Well, they've just hired Darren Rizzi as their special teams coordinator. So that was their last major hiring of all their coordinators. They've got some openings for some other assistants, but pretty much it's, there's not a colossal number of free agents that DJ Jones is probably their biggest name that they might look to re-sign, but it's nothing compared to last year when you had the Russell Wilson situation, when everybody knew that he was going to be let go, and then he was, and then they had to find another quarterback, which was huge news, and then they let Justin Simmons go, which obviously there were headlines there. They traded Jerry Jeudy, so those were some moves that weren't as expected as Russell Wilson is. So unless they hit us with a big surprise, I mean, a lot of the focus now is on the draft. I mean, are they going to go for a running back? They're going to go for a tight end. And even though free agency is coming before the draft, there probably seems to be more buzz on who they might select in the draft. But of course, that can change if there's some big move in free agency, or they do something with Cortland Sutton, maybe he moves on or they bring in a big time receiver or something along those lines.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm definitely going to ask you for an overall list of needs. We'll get into that a little bit later on. Let's start with those free agents, because as you said, not a lot. And that's always good news for your team. Any fans out there, they don't want to be aggravated like last year. So let's go over some of those names. You already mentioned a few. Let's stick on offense first. So Javonte Williams is a free agent. Any reason to believe that he'll be back?
I would be greatly surprised if he's back. I mean, he hasn't been the same guy since he suffered a serious knee injury in October of 2022. And, they need another running back. The guys they have on the roster now are Jaleel McLaughlin, but he's more of a change of pace guy. I mean, I don't think he's a regular starter type guy. Audric Estime had some moments, but then he's inactive for the playoff game as a rookie. So is he going to take another step? That's kind of a wait and see proposition. They've got Blake Watson, who was an undrafted rookie last year, who they're intrigued with, but basically they need a running back. So whenever we get around to talking about the draft or free agency, I mean, we'll see if they look for a running back in free agency, but running backs, as you well know, are guys that you could find in the draft.
Yeah, this is going to be a very, very strong and deep class of running backs. And we wonder how that might influence some of the teams in the first round regarding Genty and Hampton, because those are the top two guys that people believe are first round targets, including Genty as the top guy overall. But when you have a deep running back, sometimes that hurts the top guys overall. So we'll see if that happens. As far as the rest of the group on offense, really, we're only talking about, I mean, Burton's of course the starting fullback. You got Humphrey, one of the receivers in the group. So, I mean, what about these guys? Are they important to bring back?
I mean, those are minimum contract guys. I'm sure both will be invited back under non-guaranteed minimum contracts. I mean, last year they kind of went up and down from the practice squad to the regular roster, although both, ended up playing in every game. I mean, they're both players who are favorites of Sean Payton. So, and I don't see them, other teams banging on the door to want him. So wouldn't be surprised if both are back under non-guaranteed minimum contracts.
Okay.
I mean, Burton, he should stay on the roster probably if they're going to continue to utilize a fullback. Humphrey, he'll have to battle potentially for a spot. But elsewhere in offense, I mean, Matt Pert, he's a free agent. He's a tackle. I'd be surprised if he comes back. And if he does, it would just be a minimum type deal. But no, they don't really have a lot of key free agents on offense.
Okay. Who do you think will be the backup next year? Do you think it's one of the two free agents that'll come back, or do you think it's going to end up being like a veteran of some kind?
Backup quarterback, you're obviously talking about. That's interesting. Jared Stidham was the backup this past year. Zach Wilson was the third string guy, wasn't active for a single game. He was the emergency quarterback for each game. I would think, both are going to test free agency. I would think Zach Wilson could get a deal somewhere because he's still young, an intriguing prospect. And I mean, if I'm Zach Wilson, why are you going to come back to Denver?
Yeah.
I mean,
doesn't make any sense.
Bo Nix, who's a fellow young guy, is entrenched in the job. I mean, there's no chance of beating him out. If I'm Zach Wilson, I'd go to a team where you're at least, I mean, he was a third stringer this year, where he at least is the second stringer. And who knows, maybe it's a shaky quarterback situation and he could win the job. As far as Jared Stidham, I mean, obviously he'll probably look around and see if anybody wants to give him an opportunity to compete for a starting job. Although I would be surprised if that's the case. I could see the Broncos wanting to bring him back. He was great in the meeting room this past season with Bo Nix. Nix raved about him in terms of him working with him, although he might have to take a pay cut. I don't see him being a $5 million backup. If he's to take a pay cut and come back, I would like his chances better of being around because he's a true backup. I mean, I mean, he's not going to be a regular starter in this league. Well, Zach Wilson probably thinks he can become one. So I would think Stidham's got a better chance of being back than Wilson.
Okay, on defense, there are a couple of guys that stand out. You mentioned one of them, DJ Jones. So is this a player that the Denver is really interested in bringing back?
Well, I talked to Jones after the season, and he told me he wants to come back. And the Broncos, like the job that he's been doing, but he's been making about $10 million a year the past couple of years, and he's turned 30, and I don't know if he can command that type of contract. So he might have to take a pay cut to come back. I'm not so sure anybody's giving him $10 million. So I could see a guy who's returning. And then Cody Barton was solid as a inside linebacker. That's a position that they need to kind of retool. He's got a chance of coming back unless they can corral somebody in free agency who's better than he is.
Yeah. Again, something we'll get to with the needs in a little bit. And then Tremont Smith, also a free agent at corner. But again, that's not a big deal, right? That's just somebody that, might return on the cheap.
Yeah, he's another guy might have to take a pay cut. They like the job that he does on special teams, but when they initially signed him, they thought he was going to be in 2023 potentially their kickoff returner, but then they got Marvin Mims in the draft, and so he hasn't been. He's been back for kickoffs, but hasn't had too many of them. So, and he hasn't been in the competition remotely to play much cornerback. So
Okay.
I can't see him coming back at $2.5 million if he's willing to take a pay cut. He could certainly come back as a special teams ace.
Speaking of special teams, Riley Dixon is a free agent, and he seemed to have a good year last year. Net average inside the 20 kicks. So is that someone that probably returns?
Yeah, as long as he's not asking for crazy money, maybe I think he made about 1.7 million or so last year, somewhere in that range, maybe a slight raise, unless somebody else comes out with a crazy deal. I could see them bringing him back.
Okay.
Definitely, might come down to how much guaranteed money they're willing to give him, because they certainly might want to bring in competition to keep their options open. But if they guarantee his contract fully for next season, there's no real competition there.
By the way, Chris, who's Denver's gunner?
It's Tremon Smith is one of the guys, and
he is okay.
That's why they really like him. He's
okay.
He had the key penalty in the Chargers game, which led to that fair catch field goal, if you remember, on Thursday night at the end of the first half. That didn't help his cause, but overall, he's been. They had a lot of times in which they pinned the ball down at the one. With Riley Dixon, and Smith was involved in several of those.
Okay, so as far as before we move on, are there any players that are not free agents who we could see that might have to either renegotiate their contract or maybe be cuts altogether to try to save money? Alex Singleton is coming off, an injured year, only played several games, and I believe the team could save about 5.5 for Singleton. They could save a little bit more than 4 with PJ Locke, and they could save 3 with Roach. Do you think any of those 3 guys might have to reconsider as far as their contracts, or are there any other players the team might be calling to see if whether or not they need to negotiate or just cut altogether?
Well, for starters, Roach isn't going anywhere. George Payton made a point on his own volition after the season to say he was the most impactful free agent they brought in. Especially if DJ Jones doesn't return, Roach would be the guy who could move into the starting lineup. As far as, Damari Mathis, reserve cornerback, who's due to make about $3 million. I'd be surprised if he's still around next season. It's non-guaranteed, so there's no reason to do anything now. They could bring him to camp and look at him. They don't have to pull any immediate triggers on him. You mentioned Singleton. He seemed to be healing well from his torn ACL suffered in the third game. So indications are he should be able to return to full health, but obviously they're going to have to think of some plan at inside linebacker. I mean, he was a captain last year. Are they going to overhaul all of both their inside linebackers as starters? It's certainly possible they could restructure Singleton in some manner, but I would be surprised if he's not back. I mean, he was a captain. He was their nominee for Walter Payton Man of the Year. Yep. And then who was the other one you mentioned?
Locke, PJ Locke.
Yeah, Locke's a great story. He's been around since undrafted, joined the practice squad in 2019, worked his way up, finally got his first career start in 2023, finally moved into the lineup in 2024, but, didn't have a great season. So that's an interesting situation there. I mean, I think they have to look at who they can get as a safety in free agency or what they might do in the draft. But, they gave him a contract last year. I could certainly, there's no guarantee he's going to be around, but they'll probably have to size up, who they can get to replace him potentially that's better.
Okay. Before we get to the needs, you mentioned Rizzi. Is he the only significant coaching change right now for the team?
Yeah, pretty much. They lost their tight end coach to the Bears as offensive coordinator. They lost their passing game coordinator to the Lions as offensive coordinator. Those are positions I think that, they should certainly be able to fill. I don't know if those are super key assistant positions because they've got a lot of other guys on offense who can help Sean Payton. And then obviously offense is Sean Payton's expertise.
Yeah.
On defense, they let Greg Minuski go, the inside linebackers coach. And we can talk about it now, the inside linebackers. I mean, are they going to start from scratch there? Cody Barton is a free agent. We touched upon him. Justin Sternad's a free agent. We touched upon Singleton. So that's one position, including the coach, that they're going to be overhauling.
Okay, so it appears that's definitely one of the needs for the offseason. I don't know whether or not you've already put together like an order of top needs. It's up to you. We can just kind of spit them out and then maybe try to put them in order after, or start with the top need that you think you might already know what that is.
Well, you asked for 5 and I've got 5. So, running back, we touched upon that. I mean, they definitely need – I asked Peyton after the season if they need a bell cow type of back because it was done by committee this past season. 2 guys and sometimes even 3 were sharing the workload. But, none of their guys were anywhere close to being among the top backs in the league. I think they need a guy to get a bulk of the carries. Could that still be Estime? They'll look at him obviously throughout the spring, but I think they have to have a guy, whether it's in free agency or the draft, to potentially be a marquee running back. You mentioned.
How high do you think, based on the experience that you know of the general manager and the coach, of how high, if it's going to be from the draft, how high that they would be willing to go for a running back?
Well, if Gentry's still around at 20, you have to certainly consider him. But as you well know, you can get running backs later in the draft. And if they think that there's a guy that they can get in a later round who can be the guy, whereby there's a guy at another position that is going to definitely, you don't have the depth maybe later in the draft, then maybe you wait on a running back. And the good thing is for the Broncos is they've got all 4. They've got first, second, third, fourth round picks last couple of years with the trades of Russell Wilson and then getting the rights to Sean Payton from the Saints. That's kind of stripped their draft class. But for the first time in a while, they've got all 4 of their, top picks, rounds 1 to 4. So that brings us to need number 2.
Okay.
If they don't take a running back in the first round, certainly they could take a tight end, Warren out of Penn State, possibly. They need help at the tight end spot, and that's need number 2. In New Orleans, Peyton always had marquee tight ends. He hasn't had that in Denver. Greg Dulcich's, ended up being, released during the season, waived during the season last year, ended up with the Giants, but he's, looks like a bust with his injuries, and he's gone. And Adam Troutman has been their starter, and he's a guy that Peyton likes, but he's not a big catch guy, by any means. And then they had Nate Atkins as well. Lucas Krull, Peyton liked a lot, but he was kind of a disappointment this past season. They don't have really a big threat receiving tight end. They've got some decent blockers in there, so they definitely need help at the tight end spot. So need 2.
In our last 2 mock drafts, actually, and they were different way we did them from different people. We both landed on Loveland because Warren would have already taken in our draft, and Loveland was available, so it made a lot of sense.
Those are two guys who, a lot of people are thinking that Loveland from Michigan could be the guy as well. So moving on to need 3, we've already touched upon a little bit with PJ Locke, the safety spot. they filled a need well with Brandon Jones this past season as a free agent. He had a nice season. So they're solidified at one safety spot, but they could do better at the other spot with Locke. They've got some guys, existing players. J.L. Skinner was a draft choice in 2023, and he's been slow in developing, but they probably haven't fully given up on him. And then you have Devin Key. Delarian Turner-Yell will be back after missing all last season with a torn ACL. But the bottom line is what they have in-house is not exactly great. So they need to either sign another free agent safety or get one in the draft.
Okay. That's 3. Are we hitting an inside linebacker yet?
You got it, my friend. Inside linebacker, number 4. That might even be higher than safety, even just because it depends on what they do in free agency at inside linebacker. We've touched upon Singleton. We've touched upon Barton. Justin Sternad ended up being a starter for most of the season after Singleton went down. He's a solid special teams guy, but he's not really a starting caliber NFL inside linebacker. I mean, he's a free agent. I could see him coming back on a similar low dollar deal and saying, hey, you'll at least be able to compete for the job, but they at least like him as a special teams guy.
Okay.
A couple of intriguing guys, though, that are Drew Sanders. He was initially, they thought maybe an outside linebacker, but then with Singleton's injury and some of the problems at inside linebacker, he became more of an inside guy this past season. So if they project him as an inside linebacker versus an outside linebacker, I mean, it's going to be tough for him to get on the field at outside linebacker when you have Nick Benito, Jonathan Cooper, and Jonah Ellis. So in terms of and if they, Dontre Tillman as well. So he might be an inside linebacker, his future. And he could be an intriguing prospect who could be a potential starter. And then they had an undrafted free agent rookie last year, Lavelle Bailey, who they like. They're kind of intrigued with. I don't know if he's a starting type guy, but certainly he could stick around for depth.
Okay. And then the final need.
I would say probably depth on the defensive line. Some of that would depend on if DJ Jones returns. If DJ Jones doesn't return, they definitely need potentially another defensive lineman. They've got some solid guys there with Zach Allen, John Franklin Myers. We touched upon Malcolm Roach. Jordan Jackson got a lot of snaps. He's okay, but he's a guy who was up from the practice squad, so maybe they can do better there. So depth on the defensive line.
Okay. I do want to ask you about, because you named a few of these players already, about some of these up-and-coming players that may not be household names just yet, but players who might be able to be ready to take that next step and fill roles. You mentioned Sanders, of course. And you also mentioned, let's start with, say, DeAndre Tillman. Is he somebody that the team kind of likes as a potential contributor in the future?
Yeah, I mean, he's an exclusive rights free agent, which means he'll be back at a minimum salary. And his first game last year, he gets 2 sacks against Tampa Bay, his first NFL game. I think he had about 5 sacks for the season. The situation there is the tremendous depth at outside linebacker. I mean, he's the 4th guy among those 4. But yeah, he'll definitely still be around. And if they were to have, it's tough for him to get on the field just because of that position. But obviously, if they have injuries, he would be a guy that they could rely upon.
Okay. Anyone else on defense that could kind of fill that same role of an up-and-comer to watch?
Well, we mentioned Bailey at inside linebacker. You touched upon Sanders and safety. I mean, they got some guys in the program. We touched upon all of them before. Skinner, Key, Turner-Yell.
What do you think they like the most out of that group?
Skinner, it's hard to tell because he hasn't been able to get on the field, but he is a draft choice. And, I think you're more patient with your draft choices. Turner Yell and Key have both got burned a lot when they've been there. So there's
Okay.
no reason at this point, from an outside perspective, to be, in love with any of them. But, I mean, you look at a guy like PJ Locke, who worked his way up through the ranks and didn't take, was fifth season before he even started a game, his sixth season before he became a regular starter. So, there's guys who can work their way up, and then, they're not giving up on those guys anytime soon.
And then how about on offense? Any diamonds in the rough here? Any hidden gems? Anything like that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, they got a nice Alex Palczewski, a tackle. He was an undrafted rookie in 2023 and stepped in when Mike McGlinchey got hurt and looked really good in a couple games. Then he sprained his ankle, and McGlinchey returned. I mean, he's definitely a guy that they like for the future. And some people are wondering, I mean, they signed Garrett Bowles to a contract extension. His money's guaranteed for 2025, but, he's an older guy, 32, 33, and his money's not guaranteed after that. So he's a guy who could factor in, I mean, as a starting tackle in the future. I mean, he wouldn't be next year unless they have injuries. And, Alex Forsythe he's entering his third season, center guard. He got some heat last year because he was the guy that got bowled over on the blocked field goal at Kansas City when they lost. He got some heat there, but, they like him as an up-and-coming prospect. I mean, he battled Luke Wattenberg for the starting center job, and it was close down to the end. So he's a guy that they certainly like, moving forward for depth.
Okay.
I mean, unless they have injuries, their starting lineup on the offensive line is set for next season. Touching upon running back, Blake Watson was an undrafted rookie last year, and they like him in what he potentially could do in the future. I mean, and the history of Denver running backs, especially going back to Mike Shanahan. They would just, find these guys who seemingly came out of nowhere and they got 1,000 yards.
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying that could potentially happen with Blake Watson, but they certainly like him. And, he's a guy that, who knows, maybe he emerges and comes out of nowhere. And then in terms of receiver, they like their young receivers. I mean, these guys are no longer, Troy Franklin, Devon Vele. Those guys, aren't secrets because they had solid rookie seasons, but they're young and up and coming still.
Yeah, that running back room, I know, again, it doesn't have a true number one, but it's those kids all had talented. Those three kids at the back end of the depth chart all had very talented, very productive college careers. So there is talent back there. And like you said, you just never know.
And Tyler Bidet comes in and has a good running game last year against Tampa Bay, and you're thinking he could be a guy who could be a factor, and then he gets hurt early in the game the following week in Week 4 against the New York Jets, and he's still on the roster. They haven't given up on him.
And by the way, Palczewski, is he looked at right now? He's definitely looked at as a tackle. Even though you can play guard, he's definitely a tackle. Okay.
Yeah, he's in line to be their swing tackle, I would think, in next year, unless they bring in somebody else as a free agent. But they like him a lot.
All right. Excellent. Chris, what are you working on right now? Again, the Combine's next week. Are you heading there at all?
Oh, yeah, I'll be in Indianapolis. And, it's a little different than last year. We touched upon that when they were going after rookie quarterback. So you're thinking at that juncture, they have the number 12 pick, Bo Nix, Michael Penix. Are they going to trade up and try to get one of the top three guys? So there's probably a lot more intrigue at the Combine last year than there is this year. But Sean Payton and George Payton will talk to the media next Tuesday in Indianapolis. So we'll see what surfaces there.
Yeah, Broncos are a team on the rise, no question about it. A lot of talent here, and one more really good offseason, especially with a decent amount of cap space and the draft capital that they did not have last year, could really put them over the top and make them a serious contender, especially if Bo continues to have major improvements as he had all season long. So Chris, appreciate it. I'm going to have links in the description so you can check out all of Chris's social media posts and where to find him on X as well. And hopefully, unless something big happens, that I just can't wait to hear from you, Chris, with the Denver news. I look forward to talking to you after the draft and finding out how the offseason went.
Sounds great.
All right. So thanks again for tuning in. And we'll be doing these all off-season, well, at least for the next month or two leading up to the draft. Denver Broncos now in the books. And thanks for tuning in here for the Our Lads Football Network.